Okay,
Okay.
good evening, everyone. Again, this is the study of heaven and hell. I'm substituting for Elmo, okay, who is very busy, with his hospital duties, but we hope to have him soon with us, teaching us. We miss him, of course. And we are looking at a few spirits. We are looking at their stories, I should say histories actually, because these were real. They were communications from them. And today we're going to start looking at an ambitious scholar. Okay, and João has it displayed on the screen, so you can all follow. Everybody's going to be looking at the same text, and we'll read small pieces and we'll discuss them. Okay, one at a time. So may I have a volunteer for the reading?
Yeah, okay. I'll read.
Thank you, Sarayda. Whenever you're ready, then.
Okay. Mrs. B. from Rodier did not have to endure the poignant anguish of poverty, but she was a martyr to physical suffering due to a long string of serious illnesses, of which she had been the target for 70 years, from the time she was 5 months old. For nearly every year of her life, they had brought her to the brink of death. 3 times she had been poisoned by the tests that a dubious science conducted on her, and her constitution ruined as much by medications as by the illnesses themselves, rendered her prey until the end of her days to intolerable suffering, which nothing could relieve. Her daughter, Christian spiritist and medium, asked God in her prayers to soften her mother's cruel trials, but her spirit guide told her to simply ask for her to have the strength to bear them with patience and resignation, and then dictated the following instructions.
Thank you, Sarayda.
Okay.
Okay. So here we have Mrs. B. It's a person from Bordeaux, okay, in France. And it's a woman that is, in her mature years because she has a daughter, and a daughter that now can go to a seance and ask questions. So we're not talking about a child as a daughter. So we think of a woman in her mature years, and we see that this woman has been plagued by suffering, by physical suffering, that she has gone through one illness after another or through one condition after another. We are not giving more details about it, but we are giving the idea that she has been suffering for a very, very long time and suffering somewhat severely. And of course, her daughter decides to intercede on her behalf and ask the spiritual realm for assistance. This is at the very beginning of Spiritism, so it's going to be through seances, right? Where she's going to contact, it's not just prayers, but she might be able to contact the spirits, might be able to contact even her guardian spirit and ask for her mother to feel or find some relief, right? From all her illnesses, all her conditions. There are 2 points in this paragraph that I want to emphasize because they sound so incongruent, so odd coming from Allan Kardec. One is when he actually bashes science by saying she has been poisoned by tests of a dubious science. A science that is also ruining her constitution with wrong medications and so on. That's the first point that I want to make. And I'm not going to comment on it. I'm just going to say that it's very odd because Allan Kardec codified a doctrine whose part is the scientific approach, whose parts include a scientific method. So this is rather odd, but we are going to see later on there is a reason. Everything has a reason, and Kardec is a master of stitching things together with a beautiful narrative. So that's the first point, that he bashes science. He even gives science a very immoral aspect, because it's saying that she's being poisoned. He uses that word in the original as well. This is not a mistranslation or anything. He uses that word, that she's being poisoned by the tests of a dubious science. The second point that I want to make is about the daughter's guardian spirit or guardian angel, whichever you prefer, or spiritual guide. Actually, it's a spiritual guide, not the guardian. It's the spiritual guide. So it may be the guide of the meeting where she's going. So I'm sorry, spiritual guide. And the fact that he tells the daughter to be content and to bring to her mother words of consolation, but not words that said, I'm going to ease your pain, or words that I'm going to remove the disease or condition from you. It almost sounds as if the spiritual guide is a little unconcerned with her condition. That is also an odd point in that paragraph, but we are going to see throughout the description how beautifully these 2 points are going to come together and why it is the way it is. If anyone has any comments or questions for this part, it's just the introduction to the problem that we are going to be studying.
Yeah, Julio. Can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
How are you? Do you know by any chance if the original says Christian Spiritist also?
I can quickly check. I have it here. I think it does, if I remember right, but let me check just to be absolutely sure. Yep, it does, Elmo. It does say a spiritist. Actually, no, I'm sorry. A Christian spirit, it says. A Christian spirit, like a Christian person.
It's much better.
Yes, not a Christian spiritist, but a Christian spirit, a Christian person.
Okay, because in the translation, then it's definitely a mistake.
Yeah, and medium. Yeah, good point. Anyone else? Has a question, comment? Otherwise, we can proceed.
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Philip, go ahead.
The distinction between a Christian spiritist and a Christian spirit. What is that distinction you're looking at?
So Philip, good point. We should not say Christian spiritist, because there is no such a thing. In the same way that we should not say a cardicist spiritist. If we are spiritists, if we follow the doctrine of spiritism, we are following Allan Kardec. So to say a cardicist spiritist is to say the same thing twice. So it's unnecessary, it's pleonastic.
It's redundant. Okay.
We also have, as a spiritism, our religious core is a Christian one. So to say a Christian spiritist is, again, to say the same thing twice. So we should avoid these things, because the moment that I avoid, the moment that I allow this to happen, we can start saying, you can start pulling it apart and having every individual add an adjective in front of spiritism. And with that, create sects, create schisms and divisions. We are all spiritists. We are all Christian. We may not be Roman Catholics or Greek Orthodox, okay, but we are all Christians in that sense.
Thank you.
It's a good point, actually, that Elmo caught that. I think it's important. And just so you know, I don't think, it might not have been a mistake in translation, because I have a few different versions in the original, the French original, and one is actually spirit, a spirit like a person, and another is a spiritist. So depending on which one of these versions was used, that's why it got into it. But we should not use expressions like that. Okay.
Okay.
All right, Zoraida,
Yes.
please go ahead.
In human existence, everything has its reason for being. There is not one single suffering that you have caused that does not find an echo in the sufferings you endure. There is not one of your privations that is not the result of your excesses. There is not one tear that falls from your eyes that is not meant to cleanse a wrong or sometimes a crime. Therefore, as cruel as they might seem, patiently and resignedly bear physical and mental pain, and imagine the farmer whose limbs are broken with fatigue, but who nonetheless continues to work without stopping, because he always has been before him the golden ears of corn that will be the result of his perseverance. This is the fate of the unfortunate beings who suffer in your world. The aspiration to happiness, which must be the result of their patience, will render them resistant to the ineffable pains of humanity. Thus, it is for your mother. Each pain that she accepts as an expiation corresponds to a blemish erased from her past, and the sooner all the blemishes are erased, the sooner she will be happy. The sooner she will be happy. Lack of resignation renders suffering sterile, for then the trials will have to be recommenced. So what is most useful for her is courage, submission, and that is what you must pray for God and the good spirits to grant her. Your mother had been a good male physician in the
I'm
past.
sorry. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So all I can say is, oh pride, when are you going to allow me to accept the first words that it was just told, that we just read here in this particular excerpt, right? When it says there is not one single suffering that we have caused that does not find an echo in the sufferings that we now endure. We try to debate this to death. We try to debate this. We try to find excuses for it, but the truth is exactly what the Spirit is saying to us, that our sufferings now are just the consequences of our own actions. When we read something like this, it's not telling us that we should go to someone who's suffering next to us, or a brother or sister, and say to him or her, well, that's not a problem. You did it. Now go through it and stop complaining. It's not that. The Spirit is not saying that you should point fingers at people. The Spirit is not saying that we should be aggressive about it, or nonchalant about it, or dismissive of it. What the Spirit is saying is that there is a cause. And the cause, if we could go back in time, we would find it in ourselves. That's what the Spirit is saying. We have a duty to assist anyone, brother or sister, that is in suffering, without ever asking, oh, maybe this person did this, that, or the other in a past life, or in the past of this life. Nope, that's not the way we should go about it. We should assist, period. But when we ask ourselves the famous why me, which we shouldn't, as Elm always teaches us, to say what for, not why me. But when we ask ourselves in that moment of difficulty, in that moment where we find some desperation within us, and we end up asking why me, we should remember this answer, that the sufferings we are going through are nothing more than an echo, a consequence of what we did. But we should also see something beautiful that he says here to her, to the daughter. He says, if she does not show forbearance, if she does not show some stoicism with respect to these difficult moments, she will have to commence anew. She'll have to start everything again, either today or in the next, either in this reincarnation process or in the next one. So give her strength, give her courage, assist her in her difficult moments, but never ask or let her realize or let her ask for the end of all of this, because these are the consequences, and they will only end when everything that she set to motion in past lives or even in this one will have ceased, will have gone through their course. So he's telling us, this spirit is telling us that our difficulties, our vicissitudes, they have a reason. Perhaps we are unaware of these reasons today. And most of us are unaware of the reasons. They have reached us. But we have set them to motion somehow. So the Spirit is telling us, don't worry. And this is where I almost recommendation of the what for comes in. We should ask, why, not why me, but what can I learn from this? What is it for? What is it for me to learn? And if I have this, I will suffer still. I will have physical pain. I may even cry at times. But I will not go into blasphemy. I will not go into a state of anger, of rejecting the world and everyone and everything in it because I'm now suffering. I will endure it with as much stoicism, with as much forbearance I can muster, because I know that I will come out victorious of consequences that I created, and I will not have to undergo them again, because I will have learned something. If now I don't show this forbearance, if I don't show this meekness of attitude, the serenity in me, I will be always angry with it, and I will carry this anger, the blasphemy with me for the next reincarnation. I'll have to undergo everything from the beginning because I did not learn the lesson. Much like a student who has to repeat a grade for not having done all the work. We are not doing all the work when we are very aggressive, when we are very dismissive of the situation and we don't want to face it.
Julio.
Yes and no.
I'm just curious about something. So, for those of us that don't have to endure a life of pain and physical challenging, and the top of our worries is to solve financial issues. So what does that tell us about who we are in comparison with this lady that's going through all of this?
As a joke, probably that we are worse than she is, or she was.
Oh, really? Oh my God.
Do you know why do I say as a joke? Let me explain. But this is why I said as a joke, because I want people to, I don't want anyone to feel embarrassed to ask questions or fearful of asking questions. But remember one thing, we have to evolve morally and intellectually. If we are now not hindered by a disease, the next case will be of an idiot, a person with severe mental retardation, okay? So if we are not hindered, impaired by diseases, medical conditions, by financial burdens, perhaps because this is the time that we have everything to our advantage for us to address the moral side, which is lagging behind considerably. This is why, as a joke, I said we are probably worse than she was, because the moral side is the one that is the most difficult to address. So we should not see ourselves in, oh, I'm probably better than this individual. No, because probably this reincarnation, we got a package that is allowing us to look at the moral side. So we don't get bogged down by financial stress, by physical stress. We have all of that in check. But then what we should ask ourselves is, am I using this opportunity then to address my envy, my jealousy, my my pride, my arrogance? No, all the things that are moral in their nature. Okay. Now, removing the joke, going out, yeah, we have to, everyone has the reincarnation they need at that moment in their evolutionary path. Each and every one of us is going through what we need to go through because we are ready to face the difficulties that are coming with that reincarnation process. Be the difficulties financial, be they of a medical nature, physical condition, or be they moral. And what we should ask ourselves is not a comparison with other individuals, but ask ourselves if we are actually using this opportunity that we have to do something positive. And now is not asking for a comparison. I understood the question. I think this is why the question is good. He is placing it so that every one of us here may be aware of a possible comparison and we should move away from it. This question is valid for each and every one of us. And so is the answer.
Thank you.
And Julio,
Yes.
what I like in this paragraph here is that the spirit, instead of beating us up with our faults of the past, because we are guilty, you have to suffer, he goes into the future and projects the perspective of happiness with the conditional of having resignation naturally.
Yes.
So it's a very positive, it's a very optimistic paragraph.
Yeah, it's great. Actually, you just addressed that second point that was odd, because the Spirit tells us now why he initially said that we should not, that the daughter should not be so concerned with her situation, because he sees, the Spirit sees of all her suffering and her conditioning to this suffering, that she's at the beginning of her path to redeem all of those consequences. And he's projecting for her, based on her actions, this beautiful future, a happier future. Exactly. Good point. And we should all think of it this way, right? We should all think of what we are going through, whatever the difficulty is, that we are effacing something that was not very constructive in our path, and that we are learning, and this learning will provide us with a brighter future, a more serene or a happier future. Anyone else? Okay, so Zoraida.
Yes. Your mother had been a good male physician in the past, living amidst surroundings that made it easy to live well, and in which he lacked no gifts or praise, greedy for glory and riches, and wanting to reach the pinnacle of his science, not with a view to relieving his brothers, for he was no philanthropist, but with a view to increasing his reputation and clientele. He didn't hesitate to do anything to reach his objectives. His mother was martyred on her bed of suffering because he was attempting to do a study on the convulsions which he himself caused. His son was subjected to experiments which he hoped would give him the key to certain phenomena. The elderly saw their lives being shortened and healthy persons left weakened by experiments meant to prove the effectiveness of this or that portion. All these experiments were performed on unsuspecting, unfortunate patients. The satisfaction of greed and pride, the thirst for gold and fame were the motives behind such conduct. Many centuries and dreadful trials were needed to tame this ambitious and pride-filled spirit until repentance began its work of regeneration. The reparation has come to an end, for the trials of her last existence may even be regarded as mild compared to those she bore in the past. Take heart, then, because if her punishment has been long and cruel, the reward bestowed on her for her resignation, patience, and humility will be great.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So here we see that first odd point I mentioned about the fact that it looked like the spirit was that Allan Kardec was being against science at the very beginning, and now we see the reason. When we started the lesson, right? We saw that she had been poisoned by science, but now we see why. She wasn't being poisoned by science. She was being poisoned by herself, by her previous actions. She was being poisoned now by the consequences of actions. And mind you, not of her last reincarnation, but many reincarnations ago, not just one. She has been somewhat, if you allow me the word, expiating what she did when she was a male physician. So we see now a difference in sex, in gender, sorry, right? She had been a male physician, and she had abused of that position to do things for her own, at the time, for his personal gain, the spirit's personal gain, because that spirit as a physician, in that reincarnation as a physician, had even experimented with his own mother and son and everyone around him, all in terms of acquiring an advantage that could be fame, an advantage that could be a financial reward, the gold, that's here used allegorically, right? So it had been a physician in the worst possible sense in this, when it comes to the actions of that physician. Because we are not discussing of a physician that had made a mistake. We are discussing of a physician that intentionally hurt people so he could gain something from it. When the text says that he performed experiments on unsuspecting, unfortunate patients, today we would say in modern parlance, without the patient's consent. So the patients were being experimented on without even knowing what was going on. Perhaps they were too innocent, they were too ignorant here in the sense of lack of knowledge, all right? Not the derogatory meaning of the word. They were believing that they had a doctor working on their best interest when it was the exact opposite. All that this woman did then as a male physician in that reincarnation process created consequences, because those spirits that died, perhaps once they moved back into the spiritual realm, they became aware of all the things that she had done to them as a male physician. And then some may have become obsessors, some may have become not necessarily an obsessor, but had probably created a huge amount of negative influence, even without necessarily directing that influence towards her, but nevertheless, it was there anyway. So all the consequences of suffering in the subsequent reincarnations after that physician's reincarnation are nothing more than the cause of consequence at its best. Divine justice at its best, operating quietly in the background but without the potential for an appeal. What we do has a consequence, and we have no way of escaping, of appealing, because we know what we have done. It's imprinted, it's seared in our conscience. And eventually, even we allow it to come to our conscious mind, and we want to make reparation. We want to make we want to do whatever it takes to actually to expiate all that problem that we set to motion, that we created for others and for ourselves. So these difficult moments that she's experiencing now are blessings. Blessings because she has reached a point before this reincarnation process as Mrs. B. She reached a point where she wanted it. Actually, she had already reached before this reincarnation, because we see here the spiritual guide telling us that she's been suffering in past ones as well. And if she finishes now on this one, she would have reaped the highest honors, the highest positive consequences that she can from this act. So she's suffering, yes. But let's look where the suffering started. What is the cause of this suffering, and how she's going about it right now, or them right now. She is going through them with stoicism, with forbearance, and she's going to reap the benefits for all of this. Any questions?
Julio, it's Mariana.
Yes. Hello, Mariana.
Quick question. When she said that she was poisoned or something, what happened? Like, I didn't get the point. Like, by meds? By what?
Okay. She didn't say she was poisoned. Kardec mentions she's been poisoned by a science that is.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and what I think here I'm gonna add, so it's a little bit of my interpretation, okay? Just by looking at the when this was written, so just be very careful. The text says she has been poisoned by a trial and error approach to science. Well, if we think about what medical knowledge was in the mid 19th century, okay, in the 1800s,
Yep.
We know that it was very much trial and error. It was very much trial and error. It was not with the careful, for instance, today, if you want to do an experiment, you want to look at a new drug, you have such a bureaucratical Mount Everest to climb. And all of that is not ridiculous, it's actually to protect patients from unethical individuals, whether they are chemists, whether they're pharmacists, whether they're doctors, it doesn't matter. It's to protect the patient. At the time, we didn't have any of those things. Just to give you an idea, here in this country, we have the greatest scandal of the Tuskegee trials, where we infected unsuspected patients with syphilis. And we also, as we looked at how the disease progressed and we figured out what to do, we also denied them treatment. At the same time that we were the ones infecting them or already dealing with those who were infected, we denied them a medication. And this was such a scandal, an ethical, moral, questionable action, that in this country we decided by congressional acts to have a lot of rules and regulations, so that if someone decides to do an experiment with people, they have to go through a lot of evaluation before they even begin. Today in this country, if you do an experiment before you get approval, an approval from a medical social committee, that's a case for jail. for prison. Okay?
Yeah, makes sense. Mm-hmm.
So this is probably what I think Kardec meant there, that she was undergoing this, the consequences of her actions because the science at the time was not good enough. The
Okay.
only difference is that what she was going through was not done on purpose, maliciously. At least we don't get anything said on that was done on purpose. When she did, the spiritual guide tells us, as he as a male physician, he had malice. He had
Malice, yeah,
bad intentions.
on
Yes.
purpose. Yeah.
Good point.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. So Soraya, you can finish the
Okay.
chapter for us,
Yes.
please.
Have courage, all you who suffer. Consider the brevity of material existence. Think about the joys of eternity. Call upon hope, that devoted friend of all suffering hearts. Call upon faith, its sister, which shows you the heaven where hope allows you to enter beforehand. Also call upon those friends whom the Lord has provided you, who surround you, who uphold and love you, and whose constant solicitude leads you back to one whom you have offended by transgressing the divine laws. After her death, Mrs. B dictated communications either to her daughter or to the Parisian Spiritist Society, which reflected the most eminent qualities and which confirmed what had been said about her previous history.
Thank you. So we have now, I mean, like Elm said, right? The spiritual guide is very positive, very constructive. There's no blame, there's no accusation. And look at how beautiful the message is at the end.
Yeah.
For us all of us, because we all have some suffering at one moment or another. Perhaps not now, but maybe a year ago or maybe in a year, we don't know, but we will go through it. Because the stay in this planet, the stay in the physical realm, not the planet, is one for us to learn. And there's no learning without some form of suffering. The only ones that can consider themselves happy are the ones who are learning through an emotional suffering but not a physical one necessarily, or even in comparison to the ones who are learning from an emotional and a physical suffering. But we all have to suffer. We all have, because we all have consequences of our past. But it doesn't matter, because this reincarnation process, as any other, is very short in comparison to our life in the spiritual realm. So whatever difficult moments we go through right now, they're short in comparison to all the years that we're going to spend reaping the benefits of a life well lived in the sense of well reasoned, a life where we did not have any blasphemy against the Creator, a life of forbearance when moments were difficult, a life of charity when the moments were of abundance. Because, when everything is all peachy, all good, right? We forget about everyone and everything. We are not bothered by anything. We remember others only when we are going through a tough moment and we want others to pray for us or help us this or there and the other. So we should remember to have the forbearance in the difficult moments, but also the charity, the understanding, the patience when we are now in a good place, in a good position, because it's going to be temporary. It's not going to last forever. We are not there yet. The good in us is not permanent. So our brief moments of happiness are going to be short. They are going to end. So we should take that opportunity also to distribute that happiness that we have, which is something we always forget. And the Spirit says something beautiful. Call upon hope, the devoted friend of suffering hearts. Because when you are in a difficult moment, it's only hope that will guide you in the tunnel of darkness. You can see the light at the end, but if you have no hope, you don't find the legs to walk towards the light. So you need hope. But you also need something else. Hope's sister, which is faith, because hope makes you find the legs to work towards the light, but it's faith that lights it up. It is faith that ignites the flame at the end of the tunnel to show you where the end is. Faith is what does that. Hope is what makes you walk all the way there, supporting, enduring, bearing everything along the way. But the two together, one lights up the end of the tunnel and the other one makes you go towards the end of the tunnel. And the Spirit says it beautifully, poetically to all of us. We all suffer, we all go through through vicissitudes in life. And we should do that respecting the Lord, actually thanking the Lord, the Creator, for the difficult moments, because they were set to motion by us. And the only way that we can move forward, is if we go through these consequences so we can eliminate in us, efface, delete in us that which was not perfect. That's the only way. And later on, we have a short paragraph saying that Mrs. B actually came back now as a spirit through communications, through a medium, and told both her daughter, a medium herself, and others at the Parisian Spiritist Society that her story was actually true. So she confirmed it from beyond the grave. We as spiritists, we already know that what we are reading is not make-believe. It's not a work of fiction. We know that these are cases that are being narrated to us, not romanticized.
It's interesting that with all this struggling, she lived 70 years in the middle of the 19th century, right? You wouldn't imagine if at that time with all the struggles that she would live that long, right?
Yeah. But perhaps is a woman a spirit who, before reincarnating, came with an amount of vital fluid that was enough for her to have the opportunity of enduring more. Because it's also about the amount of vital fluid, right? Once we run out of it, whatever we do, we cannot go to a gas station and say, fill it up. Yeah. So this is a spirit that in her, let's call it the reincarnation package, she prepared herself with the vital fluid for this particular trip. Whether she was going to go through the difficult moments with stoicism, with forbearance, that was up to her. Because it's only when we face the test that we prove our character. But she came with all the ammunition, let's put it this way, with all the accoutrements to face them. And she did.
Julio, this is Teresa. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello,
okay.
Teresa.
Yeah. Hello. So I actually wanted to make a comment on the previous section about, at the top of the page where it says that she had many centuries and dreadful trials that were needed to tame her ambitious, pride-filled spirit until repentance began. So by that statement, I feel like I'm interpreting that those dreadful trials created remorse in her that led her, to then move into repentance and begin the work of regeneration.
Yes, in the sense that it's part of the process.
Yeah.
I cannot really give you a final answer in terms of the order of things necessarily, because as a doctor, when she created all those consequences, she already, as that doctor, she already knew that what was being done was wrong. This was not something that was done by out of ignorance, and this is why the consequences were so much more daring than if she had done all of that exactly the same way, but through ignorance. So it was the sufferings that started it. I really, my personal view, Teresa, I'll be honest with you, is this, that the spirit eventually reaches a point where it can no longer suppress the subconscious, and everything comes up to the conscious part of the mind,
Right.
and has to be dealt with. And the reason why I prefer this to a life of expiation that is imposed is because this doesn't betray my free will, my independence. This does not put my difficulties now as a punishment exercised by an external individual or being.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we flip it, then if now I have to experience a difficult moment to get into regret, then it means that someone must exercise a punishment against my will. So I have to go through that, and then I will be able to bring whatever I have in terms of guilt or in terms of remorse to surface in my conscious mind, so I can start addressing it. So
Right.
I prefer to believe in the other way around, because I find it, one, for me, it's more consoling. Two, because I don't find anything that goes against everything else that we study in other parts. That's all.
No, I agree with you. And I think that where it says, the dreadful trials were needed, it's just, I guess it's to be careful how to interpret that it wasn't imposed. They were necessary, but how it came about, it wasn't necessarily like, given to her against her will or whatever. But then when it goes on to say the reparation has come to an end, I'm thinking they just mean in terms of like greed and pride. It's not like she's reached some kind of final purification, right? I mean, it's not like.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah. We are talking about reparation for these topics we are discussing. So
Yeah.
she may have done other things, even in this life, that set other things to motion, which will have to be dealt with. But with every reincarnation process, we create fewer and fewer disastrous consequences and more constructive consequences. Yeah, that
Okay.
very good point, Teresa.
Thank you.
Can I just add one point of what Teresa said? But sometimes we need to be imposed because we cannot choose what's best for us, right? In this case, we don't know if she agreed with that in a way.
It's difficult, Mariana. Do you know why? Because most of the time when we think about these things, we always give that examples, oh, if you're a 5-year-old, and you ask.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the 5-year-old, no, but as a spirit, we don't have that 5-year-old imposition or let's say momentary lapse of knowledge, because the spirit of a 5-year-old may actually be even older than the spirits of the parents.
Sure.
But if we think that there is an imposition, and this is probably one of the last remnants of repressive religious belief that we all have in some way or another. We all have, unfortunately. And it was part of our education. It was part of humanity's education. So we should not be against it. We should just be polishing it off very slowly but methodically. If we believe that there is a point where there is an imposition, even if the imposition comes from an order of spirits who know much more than we do, then I want to ask all of you to think about this as a homework. Then why do we talk about free will? So when we begin our journey in the human form and we are upgraded to the word spirit, we begin our journey into active intelligence, into a moralizing intelligence, into an abstract form of its manifestation. When we begin to have the idea of love, or the idea of justice, the idea of free will, and we begin developing them. So if we now receive an external command, whenever and wherever that command comes from, to do this or that, I question why we talk about free will. Because then either I have reached a certain point of free will or not. If now I have, but all of a sudden someone can take it away from me by saying, no, you have to go through this, that, and the other. And then you see, for instance, hardened criminals in the spiritual realm that stays there for centuries in that situation. Then we were going to start asking ourselves, well, but then why wasn't it imposed on them so much earlier? And these were individuals, for instance, that in some lifetimes killed people by the thousands, and they're now there mulling it over in a corner, okay, doing sometimes even evil things. So I think we should be very, very
Got
careful
it.
and
Yeah.
not, all of us, you know.
Yeah, maybe the word imposition is not the correct one. Yeah, it's too hard to say imposition, but I think, like, the way that I see, it's kind of negotiation in a way. Like,
Yeah.
they come to you, like, and sometimes maybe they suggest what kind of trials you should be, or I know that it's hard to think about it as a individual with free will, like by yourself, but we have influence for the good spirits. And so I'm more thinking about this negotiation of a new life in a way. I don't know if
Yes,
it's the
but
correct word.
again, we have to be very careful. I like the one you mentioned about the influence, and but just quickly about the language, we have to understand Kardec had two problems. He knew the language. He was a clever person. He could not have let this go unnoticed. So he definitely knew that the language was outdated, but he was also introducing a lot of new concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So he had two battles to face. He could not, for the life of him, deal with both flanks. He picked the right one for us. I believe he picked the right one because he introduced them. Because if he had just polished the language, he would have been a grammarian or a linguist. But he gave us something much more precious. It's up to us now to change those things, or to at least read not to change the letter of the message, not to change the original words. We have to study what they meant in those days, what was the folklore, the customs of those days, so we can understand in today's terms without changing the original words. But going back to something you mentioned, let us also not think of negotiation, because in every negotiation, people have to acquiesce to certain things and others on both sides, right? So it's really not a negotiation. They come in and they may actually say, we suggest. Like, and in here, in this point, it's a good analogy when we say, it's when you go to your career counselor in a college and they say, oh, you could take this course, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
Take it or don't take it, or if you do this, you have to do that. No, they suggest, because they are better prepared to see.
Understanding, yeah.
So for all of us, the idea of influence is what exactly is happening. We have our own views of life, and we are going to associate ourselves with other spirits that are going to influence us for the good and also for the bad, or for constructive purposes and non-constructive purposes. And we eventually are going to use our free will to think, create the options, and pick one.
Got it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because this is a discussion that it always comes to forefront of when we talk about reincarnation, right?
Sure.
How much are we involved or not involved, and how much is imposed, is not imposed. And it's funny. I this week I received a text from an interview that André Luiz gave in 1964 to the to a Spiritist magazine, and he gave an interview through the mediums Chico Xavier and Valdo Vieira. And one of the questions is, all reincarnations, even from individuals connected to inferior conditions, are object of a detailed planning by the spiritual administrators. And then André Luiz answers, there are reincarnations that are almost automatic, especially if the spirit is still closer to the animal kingdom than to humankind. And then understanding that the more important the incarnation of the spirit in terms of the work towards humanity, more ample and complex will be the reincarnation planning. I know it's not a word you like, but that's the word André Luiz used. Elmo wants to say something.
Oh, please.
Oh, thanks. So the word imposition here, I don't like it, but we can see as self-imposed. If I, at the moment that I use my free will, make decisions to take one or another direction, I impose upon myself to deal with the consequences of that decision. So let's say in this case of this is a spirit who made an option to abuse of his medical status to promote himself, not with you making experiments, not with the intention of helping a patient, but to promote himself. At that moment, using his free will, he imposed upon himself the consequences. So it's not that someone else is imposing something upon you, but you are exercising your free will, making decisions for your future.
Agree.
Context is everything.
Thank you.
Just one thing about what Joan was mentioning about André Luiz's answer. If you read the Evolution in Two Worlds, there is one particular chapter, I think it's either chapter 2 or 3, the very beginning of the book, where André Luiz addresses exactly that at the very beginning, when we are not in human form, and necessarily we don't call them spirits, the beings, the essences that are associated with that proto-human form, the reincarnations are actually very, very fast, almost automatic, like he said in the interview. And he actually uses that word in the Evolution in Two Worlds. He says that basically you discarnate and almost immediately, like an animal, you almost immediately you're back here in another physicality. Because there's very little that can be learned in the spiritual realm, because you have not developed skills to understand concepts that are very, very abstract, such as universal love, charity, goodness. These are concepts that require a lot more cognition to be picked on. But as we evolve more and more and more, the influence of the spirits becomes less and less, because we begin to take the reins in our hands more and more. And yes, we do we have the so-called plan. We do draw a plan, but we draw a plan. It's not a plan that we receive from someone. It's not a blueprint that says, here it is, go and do it. This is the important part. So for instance, to now tie up with what Elmo just said quite nicely, when he did that, he misbehaved in the medical professional, in that case, for personal gain. He made the plan of his future sufferings, the imposition, the self-imposition of the future sufferings. In that sense, there is a plan, but it's not a plan that comes from outside. It comes from ourselves. That's the part that we have to tweak.
Elmo has something else to say.
Yes, but you see, Teresa, the Spirit follows up what you read with something very interesting and very important for us to see, is that the reparation has come to an end, for the trials of her last existence may even be regarded as mild, which is very important. Is a reminder to us that the divine justice is not like our physical action and reaction, in which 1:1, 2:2. It's not that way. The divine justice is of benevolence, is of love, because God is all love. So even though he committed all those mistakes in the past, in this reincarnation, with active resignation, with faith, he is able to eliminate 1,000 errors with one action. So it's the law of cause and consequence. It's not a physical law of action and reactions into 1:1. As Paul of Tarsus reminds us, love eliminates a multitude of errors. That statement here is very important. It may even be considered as mild for what he has borne in the past.
Yeah.
Okay, we went over a little bit, but it's a good discussion. Okay, so we stop here. Reminding everyone, for those that just joined for the second part, we have 2 lectures on the weekend. Saturday by Dr. Vicente Pessoa on scientific and spiritual aspects of forgiveness through the United States Spiritist Federation YouTube channel and Facebook. And on Sunday, our own Giulio Padovan giving the lecture, The Implications of Rational Faith, at 11 a.m. through our regular Zoom platform. Okay, so both at 11 a.m. Saturday and Sunday, you're all invited. Okay, so going to do our final prayer. Elmo?
Okay. And we give thanks to God, our Creator, and the provider of all opportunities for our growth. We give thanks, our beloved Master Jesus Christ, for the peace that he lives for us, for the light of his gospel, to illuminate the pathway for our happiness. We give thanks to our spiritual benefactors for the guidance, for the orientation, for the patience and indulgence towards our difficulties. We give thanks for being able to exercise our intelligence in constructive dialogues, And we ask that the good spirits continue to inspire, to orient us, to make good use of the lessons that we learn together, that we may apply in our daily lives all things that we have learned through our studies. May you continue to be back together. May you continue to improve. And we ask permission to close our meeting. So be it.